All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session of August 25th, 2020. This meeting is called to order. Conduct our attendance roll call. Councilmember Aldama.
Here.
Councilmember Clark. Councilmember Hugh.
Here.
Councilmember Tomachaw.
Here.
Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Councilmember, or Vice Mayor.
Present.
And I'm present. All is accounted. So, Ms. Bauer, would you introduce item number 1, please?
Presentation on the city's investment portfolio.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here to lead our staff presentation this afternoon is Lisette Camacho, our Director of Budget and Finance.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. This presentation is to provide council an update on our investments. Leading the presentation is Rebecca Chitwood. She's to my left. She's the city's controller. And also Ash Mehta. He's with Public Trust. With that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Chitwood.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. I'm here to present, go over the investment policy that we have for the city. So investment of public monies is set by Arizona Revised Statute 35-323. In that statute, it calls for a maximum maturity of 5 years when investing public monies, and it also defines the eligible investments that we can invest in. Currently in our portfolio, we have U.S. Treasuries, federal agency and securities, corporate bonds, commercial paper, and interest-bearing savings accounts. So in our investment policy, we have objectives that we have set, and presented in order of priority is safety, liquidity, diversification, and yield. So in our policy, safety is first and foremost. We set our investments with the safety priority. We make our purchases, and they're made to preserve the principal amount of the investments. That is our first priority when we invest public monies. The second priority is liquidity. We need to make sure that we have sufficient cash available if current expenditures call for the need for cash, that we can liquefy the investments that we have. The third order of priority in our policy is diversification. And diversification allows for us to diversify by investment type, the issuer, and maturity. And this is to avoid the market risk while we're investing our public monies. And last but not least is the yield, and that is to get acceptable market rate of return for our investments. So our investment strategy is we have 2 portfolios with Public Trust Advisors. The first one is our liquidity portfolio, and this portfolio focuses on the short term. It allows for liquidity. So investments in this portfolio typically mature within 6 months to a year, and that allows for us to draw on money if needed or to reinvest for another 6 months to a year as those come mature. The second portfolio we have is the core portfolio, and this focuses on the longer term, and it allows for diversity in investments. And this is normally invested with a maximum maturity of 5 years, which is per state statute. And so we can have shorter to longer term investments in that portfolio.
All right, just a question for you.
Yes. Can you give me the amount or percentages that we keep in liquidity and in core?
Mayor, members of the council, we will have slides on the dollar amounts for each portfolio. It's later in the presentation.
All right, thank you.
So our core portfolio is managed by Public Trust Advisors to a benchmark, and it's following the city investment policy, and we receive quarterly strategic updates with Public Trust Advisors. We meet with them quarterly to go over our portfolios. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Mehta with Public Trust Advisors.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. My name is Ash Mehta. I'm from here in Phoenix, and wanted to talk a little bit about our approach to your portfolio. And we'll start off with the investment policy, which Rebecca just went over. Back in 2017, early 2018, we collaborated with the budget and finance staff to modify the investment policy for the city to create two different portfolios. There would be a liquidity portfolio and a core portfolio, which Rebecca just spoke to. The liquidity portfolio tends to be managed to the city's needs, and the core portfolio will be invested out for longer duration and is managed to a benchmark rather than to cash flow needs. This was fully adopted in January of 2019. So Public Trust is here all over the country. We've an office here in Phoenix, Arizona. Our headquarters are in Denver, and our portfolio managers, which manage this account, are in the Los Angeles area. Here you can see the team that all works with your account here. And again, we started working with the city in 2015. We worked collaboratively with the city staff to manage the liquidity portfolio as well as the core portfolio. And again, with the tenets of the investment, we've discussed safety, liquidity, yield. That is how we invest the funds. I want to briefly talk about the economic environment. Some things outside, obviously everyone's aware of the current epidemic, but we also have some other factors that we'd like to discuss here. This chart is, let's just start with this chart. It starts in 2008 on the far left-hand side at the bottom, and this is a measure of quarter-over-quarter changes in GDP for the entire economy. Now, we can see coming out of 2008, we had the last crisis, a financial crisis, and consistently we've had, around 0 up to 5%. And what we really saw in the first quarter of 2020, which is when the initial pandemic fears struck, we saw a drop of about 8% in GDP. For the second quarter, we saw a 32% drop in GDP quarter over quarter. So we're seeing some very extreme drops in productivity across the U.S. This chart is also kind of to talk about the longer-term impacts of the pandemic and the shutdown of the government. What we can see, or of the economy rather, what we can see is at the end of 2007, during the last financial crisis, when it really kicked off, that employment number really didn't recover for almost 6.5 years. So we need to be kind of aware of what's going on in the economy and be aware of, that this is a long road to recovery and not something that's going to bounce back pretty quickly. What we also want to talk to you with respect to the portfolio is interest rates and the Federal Reserve's monetary policy during this pandemic. What this chart shows is back in 2006. It starts in 2006. The brown line at the top is the federal funds rate, and the areas in red are recessionary time periods. What the line really tells you is what the Fed is doing for monetary policy to help shore up liquidity in the market. We've dropped rates, or they have dropped rates pretty much to 0, and they've also been purchasing assets out on the open market to extend liquidity out in the market so there isn't a run on the banks. Are there any questions so far?
Mayor,
Go ahead.
if you could go back one slide, please, on the employment non-farm payrolls. Am I correct in that the baseline here is not 0? It's actually 1.3? So just so for the sake of the big picture on this graph, it's been truncated.
It's been truncated for this.
We're only seeing the top line of the graph, not the basis below, because there's, in essence, as much of the graph not being shown as there is.
Correct.
I'm
But this is
looking
just
at
to
it.
show the impact, and the time that it takes to recover back to normalized levels, or what we thought was normal in 2007.
Okay, but there's still, on that slide, there's a lot of employment that is not shown on that graph because the graph doesn't start at 0 at the bottom, it starts at 0.13.
That is correct.
Thank you.
If you can look at this chart here, we've blown it up on the left-hand side, and the top of the yield numbers are there on the left. So everything on this chart, I just want to highlight, is below 1%. And what this chart is a measurement of the yield curve for the 4 different types of securities that are authorized in the portfolio or that are allowed by state statute. We have treasuries, agencies, corporate bonds, and then municipal debt is the highest yielding currently. But really what the purpose of this graph is to show is that interest rates are all below zero, and for the intents and what we can invest in this portfolio, everything is below 1% currently. Any questions on this slide? Okay, now what we'd like to do is talk about the city's investments. We're going to review what Rebecca said. Safety, liquidity, and yield are the three main purposes for the investments, as well as PTA likes to overlay compliance and transparency. We like to make sure our clients know exactly what's going on in the account at all time and that we are compliant with state statute and your investment policy. So in building your investment strategy, this is just a quick example of different strategies that Public Trust offers to its clients. You are in the 1 to 5 year for the core portfolio, and then the liquidity portfolio, again, is managed to the city's needs, so it doesn't invest against a benchmark. So again, to talk about the total portfolio, as of the end of fiscal year 2020, we have $192,870,000. This portfolio, the entire portfolio in fiscal year 2020 returned $2.6 million in income and appreciated about $2.6 million due to the drop of interest rates outside of the portfolio. Any questions on this slide? And Councilmember Clark, this will address your question. In the core portfolio, we have $115 million, and in the liquidity portfolio, we have $77 million, which is a total market, again, $192 million. If you look on the right-hand side as the total portfolio, because this is the combined portfolio, we have a lot of stuff maturing, a lot of issues maturing in 0 to 3 months. That tends to be heavily in the liquidity portfolio. And then throughout the rest of the portfolio, you can see a ladder out to 5 years of maturities. Any questions on this slide? Okay, we're going to address the liquidity portfolio. The value as of June 30th, 2020 was $77 million. The liquidity portfolio earned $1.1 million in earnings for the fiscal year. And again, you can see the breakdown. It's about 65% government, 25% money market, and then a small piece of corporate debt as well. And again, as we talked about, the maturity being skewed heavily because of the liquidity portfolio. Again, 40% of this portfolio matures in 0 to 3 months, and then the remainder matures within a year.
Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
looking at your liquidity portfolio, it looks like during the past year, it's dropped by about $3 million. Is that correct? The value?
No, that was actually funds that were matured and spent. It may have, it's not a decrease in the value, but it may have been spent on cash flow requirements.
So if it hadn't been spent, it would be in the $80 million range as well for this year?
Mayor, members of the council, the purpose of the liquidity portfolio is to have liquid assets to use to pay for some of our obligations. The main purpose is to pay for debt service. So
Yes.
normally the investments matures in December and also in January and also in June and July. And the drop in the value is not a drop in the value of the investments. It's because some investments matured and we didn't reinvest up to the 80 million. We used some of the maturities to pay for debt service and other obligations that we've had.
How much have we expended of the liquidity portfolio in the past from June of 19 to June of 20?
Mayor,
How much did we take out to spend for debt, et cetera, all the stuff you mentioned?
Mayor, members of the council, our goal is to keep about 75 to 80 million in the
That's
liquidity
not what I
portfolio.
asked, what your goal was to keep in there. I'm asking how much, do you know how much you spent in the past year from the liquidity portfolio to cover debt and other items that you cited?
Mayor, members of the council, if I may. So, Councilmember Clark, the the amount that we spend is the amount of the city's budget. So it goes up and down, up and down, up and down as we spend it. I think what you're asking is the net amount that changed. If you look at the very bottom of this slide, it tells you that the investments gained about 1.2 million. So the difference there, 80 million to 77 is 3, but you gained 1.1. So somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million less, if that makes sense, was taken out of the fund because
That's what I wanted to know.
so that's the answer to that question, I believe.
And I heard Ms. Camacho say the cap for this fund is 80 million. Is that correct?
Mayor, members of the council, it doesn't technically have a cap. We just continuously monitor it depending on the city's cash flow needs. Its target is around 80 million.
Okay. So if the total value of the portfolio is 192, let's say 190, approximately a little less than half is in the liquidity portfolio?
Mayor, members of the council, it's about 40%.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we'll go back to this slide again. The liquidity portfolio makes up about 40% of the entire portfolio, and the core portfolio, which is your longer-term portfolio, makes up 60% of the portfolio. Okay, again, we're going to shift over to the core portfolio now. Again, we talked about modifying the investment policy in 2017 and adopting it in 2018. We began to shift money over from the liquidity or the former liquidity portfolio or total portfolio to the core portfolio in 2018, actively managing to that 1 to 5 year benchmark. Because of the interest rate environment, we weren't able to push out duration until about February of 2020, which was very fortunate for the city. We were able to push duration out in February prior to the pandemic from 1.98 years over to 2.6 years, which basically means we don't really move to zero on the interest rate earnings of this portfolio for an extra 6 months by moving that shift. Because interest rates have dropped to zero, the reinvestment risk is obviously zero, or is whatever the yield is. So basically what we've done is protect the assets for an additional 6 months by extending duration. Any questions on that?
Yes, Mayor. And this may go to Ms. Rios. She may have to answer it. We didn't adopt this strategy until 2017. What were we doing prior to 2017? Was everything in a core portfolio?
Did you want to answer that, Alyssa?
Sure. Mayor, members of the council, prior to 2017, we had one portfolio. So we didn't have the liquidity in the core portfolio. So within that portfolio, the investments could range per state statute for the maturities between 0 to 5 years. So it followed state statutes, but we did not identify a liquidity or a core portfolio at that time. So it's one investment portfolio in aggregate.
I guess one of the questions I'm thinking of is why, I think it's a good strategy, but why did we all of a sudden adopt this strategy in 2017 of splitting up the portfolio 40-60%? Why?
Mayor, members of the council, with the core portfolio, the thought is to invest the investments longer term, closer to the benchmark, versus the liquidity portfolio, which would give us liquidity and available funds to meet obligations. So with the core portfolio, you can designate, and the 60 to 40% is based on cash flow needs. The liquidity portfolio will fluctuate, again, based on the cash flow needs of the city. That 60 to 40% weighting could change depending on the city's needs. And also, with the core portfolio being extended longer term, then the thought was that we would be able to take advantage of higher interest rates.
Mayor, members of the council, if I could add something to that. So I think Councilmember Clark, you're asking a question about sort of the history of this portfolio. So when Lisette and I arrived here in 2013, the portfolio had a different investment advisor. and it wasn't being probably paid very much attention to, and quite honestly, it wasn't the most important thing to either myself or Mr. Dunsing at the time, or Lisette when we first arrived here. So once things kind of stabilized, we sought to look at the policy. At that time, it had not even been updated to allow for 5-year investments. The city's policy still only allowed for 3-year investments. So we began by changing the policy and allowing for the 5-year investments. We then went out to bid in the marketplace to find a new investment advisor. We did hire, at the time, Public Trust Advisors. It took them, about a year to get familiar with the city's needs, and they proposed to us this concept of core versus liquidity portfolio. We made those changes to the policy in 2018, I believe. And then we've slowly been moving assets and getting them moved over to the core portfolio, or taking them in the core portfolio and extending their duration. That's taken some time because of the market and the desire on our part not to take losses in selling potentially an investment at a loss to reinvest it. So it takes a little bit of time to get there, and that's the direction that we're going now. Hopefully that answered your question.
It does, thank you.
And to speak a little bit on that, if you look in 2020, interest rates had actually begun to decline, which is why we were in a position to then extend out duration. Prior to that, we weren't able to do it, again, because of not taking a loss on the securities. So this slide is what we'd really like to focus on there's 2 things on this slide I'd like you to focus on. This is the prior year versus the trailing year. So if you look at the third box here, third graph, we look at how we invested compared to the benchmark when we weren't able to match those securities. The prior year, again, is from January 2019 to December 2019. The portfolio returned 2.73% for calendar year 2019. In February, since we were able to move to that benchmark and push assets out, the trailing year, that's from July of 2019 to June of 2020, total return for the portfolio was 4.9%. Again, on that farthest right over graph called the trailing year, we can see that we're much more aligned with the benchmark, which is in dark blue, and our total return, which is in a lighter blue shade there. Do we have any questions on this slide? Okay, and then we're going to talk about the core portfolio as a whole. The value as of June 30th was $115 million, and the earnings for that portfolio were $1.4 million for fiscal year 2020. Again, the asset breakdown is about 73% government-sponsored, or government, and about 15% corporate assets. The other highlight on this page is because we were able to push out duration, the value of the portfolio actually increased $2.5 million because of the higher yielding interest rate securities that are in there. Any questions?
Mayor. Thank you. Looking this over, it looks to me like we're getting a better rate of return off of our liquidity portfolio, the short-term investments, than we are off the core portfolio, the longer term. Is that typical, or is that an unusual situation?
That's not very, the longer-term portfolio should be yielding more just because of the longer-term strategy. You have to look at the 4.9 is the total return.
Right.
So you would probably be, again, because we were able to push out duration, the interest rate went down, but because the value of the securities went up due to the lower interest rate market, we were actually able to see more appreciation in the core portfolio than we were in the liquidity portfolio, because those are shorter term securities.
Right, and with the total return of the combined at 4.9 and 40% of the investment being in the liquidity portfolio, we would have anticipated $1,036,000 in return, but we actually got $1,172,000 in return. So not quite, but a significant better return. I'm just wondering, is that?
We're talking about the liquidity portfolios or the?
Right.
Okay.
We got 40% of our money is in the liquidity portfolio, but more than 40% of our interest earnings came from that portfolio, by my numbers. So I'm just wondering, is that a typical situation, or is that a inverse that we're in?
It's an inverse currently, but typically you would see a better yield from the longer-term core portfolio than the liquidity portfolio, but because of the time that we did the rotation to the longer duration securities, those assets actually went up. The book yield went down, but the value of the portfolio went up. So it's an interactive relationship, but the in total return was 4.93 versus the liquidity portfolio, which was quite a bit lower.
Mayor, question. How reactive are you? If you see over a period of months that the liquidity portfolio, as Councilmember Turner referred to, is doing better than the core portfolio, how agile can you be, since the 60-40 split is kind of arbitrary, how agile can you be to move money from the core into the liquidity? Sorry about that. From the core into the liquidity when the liquidity is outperforming the core. Did you understand what I asked?
I did understand the question. We can talk to, does Lizette want to address that?
Mayor, members of the council, if I understand the question correctly, how soon can we, say, sell assets or investments in the liquidity portfolio and move them to the core, or vice versa?
Vice versa, yes.
That can be done fairly quickly.
What is fairly quickly?
A day,
a week, a
48
month?
hours. A day, 48 hours. It just depends on, obviously, they have to do the research on the available investments, but within 48 hours, based on what available investments are out there.
So how historically, how agile are you being with our investment to move it around where it is obviously doing us the most good?
Mayor, members of the council, I think what you're seeing here is a reflection of the fact that this core portfolio is in transition. So we're selling investments and we're buying investments and building up the core portfolio. So when you look at its return, this $115 million was not all in this portfolio all at the same time. So the strategy, again, is to get it there, layer the investments out the 5 years, and quite frankly, hold them, because it is a core portfolio, so we can realize those yields. If we need to, yes, we can liquidate quickly and move them back to the liquidity portfolio, but we wouldn't necessarily want to be too reactive to something that is happening in the market, because again, these are they're not like the stock market type of investments. They're more fixed income types of investments, and so we can do that, and we obviously have public trust here to advise us, but that's not something that we're prone to doing, is selling them. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we had assets, but we would have had to sell them at a loss to move them, and the direction we gave public trust was not to sell them at a loss and to wait for them to mature so we could reinvest them into the longer term investments.
I understand all that, but the whole idea is to make money for the city, one way or the other. Yes, safeguard the city's interests, but make money for the city, right? That's why we invest. We don't just put it in a piggy bank and assume it's going to earn no interest. We put it in different types of piggy banks to try to earn money on our investment. So I guess what I'm asking from a layman, because I really don't know anything about any of this, but what I'm asking is the driver, or why isn't the driver to make as much money as possible from the city by moving core to liquidity and liquidity back to core, not instantly, but as I said before, with agility, so as to reap the most benefit for the city? You understand. Okay, explain.
So, Mayor, council members, what we work with the city to do is on a semi-annual basis is to look at the portfolios, look if there's excess liquidity or cash sitting in other accounts that we don't manage as public trust advisors, and see if there's an ability to move assets from liquidity to the core portfolio. If there's excess cash, we can look a year out and say, okay, when something matures in the core portfolio, we can move the proceeds to the liquidity portfolio to address any cash needs. But the way the portfolios are designed is the core portfolio is managed to a 5-year benchmark. If the 5-year benchmark is yielding 22 basis points, we're going to manage to meet that 22 basis points. So we're going to manage to meet whatever the benchmark is in the core portfolio. With the liquidity portfolio, there's different factors that's not managed to a benchmark, it's managed to cash flow of the city and cash needs. So if there is excess liquidity in the liquidity portfolio, there's more than 80 million or 100 million, and we only need 70 million, then we can move the excess cash to the core portfolio and invest that out longer term, if that is what the city decides to do.
Follow-up question, who determines what the benchmark is? You talked about a 5-year benchmark for the core portfolio. Who determines what that benchmark is?
That was a collaborative communication between the city and our portfolio managers. Again, because
So it's an arbitrary number?
Well, state statute limits investments out to 5 years.
No, I'm not talking about the length of investment. I'm talking about the number you selected for benchmark, that it's got to meet over that 5-year period. We're at the end of that 5-year period. You said that you all got together and decided what the benchmark number should be. How did you arrive at that benchmark number?
The benchmark number is I used 22 basis points as an example, but it is a portfolio of securities that exists out there. It's 1 to 5 year securities of the U.S. government obligations. So it's a theoretical portfolio, and we invest this portfolio to meet that benchmark, to try to mimic that benchmark.
Mayor, members of the council, I think it's a terminology. It's not a random number that we decided. It's an actual recognized benchmark.
Where did it come from?
It's done by financial institutions all over the world. This is the Morgan Stanley, or this is Bank of America, and they create this benchmark of all securities that exist.
Okay, because what I first heard was that you all got together and decided what the benchmark would be. But now I'm hearing that there are professionally recognized institutions that give advice as to what they believe a 5-year benchmark should be.
Yes, I apologize. That's called a benchmark index, and there's quite a few out there. Different banks run different benchmarks, and they publish that information daily.
Thank you.
Mayor, members of the council, I'd also like to add that the benchmark is also not the specific benchmark, but the criteria on selecting the benchmark is also within the city's investment policy, which is brought forward for city council's approval. And any changes to the policy themselves are also brought forward for city council approval.
So if I could follow up, Mayor, so do you indicate at the time that you bring this information forward to council, I think it's on an annual basis, do you indicate to council the available benchmarks that we might consider in accepting? Or how is that determined? I mean, if it's supposed to be done with council knowledge and approval, we don't know what benchmarks are out there. How do we find out if not from you guys?
Mayor, members of the council, we're going to talk about that in a little bit.
Okay.
We actually, Ash is going to talk about that on slide 30.
Okay.
Councilmember Aldama.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Clark asked some of my questions, but I guess just in a different way. Councilmember Clark mentioned, we want to invest our dollars to make money, and that's really the philosophy behind investing. However, and you spoke a little bit too on policy. What is our strategy? Is it to make money right now, or are we conservative? Are we holding steady? What is our policy that the council has said that we want you to do with those investments?
So Mayor, Members of council, Councilmember O'Donnell, I'd like to insert here just a little bit to add some context. Perhaps we go back to slide 4. And so our investment policy is built with some goals and objectives. And it's safety, liquidity, diversification, and yield. You can change any of those elements. If you say we don't care about safety, you might be able to increase your yield. If you could put all of your eggs in one basket and not have the diversification, but we have a blended portfolio that meets these investment policies that are kind of what the council has said. So the goal isn't maximum return, because we could invest in derivatives and other types of products that have tremendously higher upside, but also at the same time have tremendously lower risk and downside. So it's coming up with a portfolio that meets these objectives of our investment policy, which is then hopefully, with meeting these criteria, then yields the best overall result. So that's what it's, you could establish any of your investment goals. But for the city, we stay A, within our state policy, and 2, within our adopted policies, and it's a combination of meeting all of these items. And when you do that successfully, then we feel we're protecting our citizens' assets correctly and getting the maximum amount of return.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Manager. That's precisely what I was asking. I mean, yes, we want to make money, but unless we've changed our direction, then we ask you to keep doing what we're doing. And it sounds like safety is number one. We don't want to lose money, but no one said we want to be really risky and aggressive and start making really high dollars. That's the policy. So thank you for bringing that up. But I just want to be careful when we say we want to make money. We haven't changed the projection of this portfolio. Thank you.
Yeah, a question I have for you is there been a point where we've actually cost us money to have this managed with the interest basically being almost zero? It's great when you want to go out and get a loan. It really bites when you actually have money that you're hoping to make interest off of. So, it's one of those situations that it's nice to have interest low, but not when you have a lot of money sitting in the bank and you're looking to make money off that. But curious is, I don't know what your fee is, and with the very low interest rate return, have we ever gotten into a situation where we've actually paid more than what we're returning?
Mayor, members of the council, no. Their fee is less than $100,000 a year, and the portfolio is making over $3 million a year.
Perfect. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Mayor, members of the council, we'll head back to the slides here. This is the core portfolio. Again, when we talked about investing out up to 5 years, you can see here there's a small amount of money that's available in liquid is 11.1%, which is in the money market right now, looking for an opportunity to reinvest. And the remaining assets, again, you can see out there, are smoothly laddered from 9 months out to about 5 years. And you can see the breakdown of the asset classes, government-sponsored entities, and corporate debt. Any questions on this slide?
Yes, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Explain what corporate debt is.
Corporate debt would be companies like Apple, Microsoft.
So it's
Bank of America.
basically the stock market? Is
No.
it the stock market?
It's not the stock market, it is the fixed income market. So it's not an equity investment, it's a debt investment.
Okay,
So it doesn't tend to fluctuate in value as much as equity investments do.
thank you.
And because of that corporate debt that we hold in the portfolio, we wanted to talk a little bit about our research process. We have a staff of 6 members in Denver that review all of our investments in corporate debt. We do like to stay ahead of the rating agencies, and this slide briefly talks about the different approach that we take here, but we're not going to spend too much time on it. We just want to let you know that we do spend a lot of time trying to stay ahead of the rating agencies on any downgrades in the corporate debt that we invest in.
I do have a curious question, Mayor. I guess I have a lot of them today. We've got an election coming up, and dependent upon the results of that election, our economy could move in 2 drastically different directions. And so I was thinking of your 6 people are they developing two scenarios? One, if the economy goes dramatically south after the election, and one, if the economy continues to improve after the election. How are you handling that?
Mayor, council members, our team has models built out for quite a few different scenarios. They spend a lot of time basically doing a lot of what-if scenarios. So they do have quite a bit of ideas of what the portfolios would do based on certain outcomes.
Follow-up question. So how quickly can you be reactive, dependent upon which scenario develops after an election? How quickly can you, if necessary, readjust the city's portfolio?
Mayor, council members, it's really a function of the collaborative work between the city and the portfolio team. So if your budget and finance department tells us that we need to increase liquidity or we need to add more money to the core portfolio or extend out duration, we work with the city to do that. So we take our direction from the city.
Mayor, members of the council, as Ms. Camacho indicated earlier, we can sell or trade an investment within 24 to 48 hours if it's necessary.
A lot of that is also based upon maturity too, correct?
Mayor, that's correct. And so with the core portfolio and the extended investments out to 5 years, we wouldn't necessarily want to sell one of those 5-year investments, but we have them layered at different stages, and then we have the liquidity portfolio to help us manage our current cash flow.
Mayor, council members, this is, again, that maturity thing, the maturity of the core portfolio. What you can see is 11% is sitting in cash right now, so that can be moved at any time to the liquidity portfolio or into your bank account if needed. And that may be a strategy that the portfolio managers are currently implementing right now.
Okay, Mayor, question again. The 11% can be moved at any time. Have you figured out how well that 11% with the 0 to 3 month, I guess that's how long we hold it, how well that is performing compared to the other bars on your graph, 9 to 12 months, 1 to 2 years, so on and so forth? In other words, I'm curious enough that I want to know that how good is that 11% of our portfolio doing in comparison with the other sections of our portfolio?
Mayor, members of council, if you look at this chart here, this again will tell you a little bit about what the money markets are basically paying about anywhere from 2 to 4 basis points right now.
Okay.
The treasury yields and the corporate bond yields, this is the current value. I mean, the 5-year is everything's under 1%. What we'd like to do and what we'd like to see at that 11% is basically, if we have an opportunity right now, which there isn't a lot of opportunity to invest at attractive rates, that may be the time right now where they're sitting in cash and trying to find a better opportunity to invest those funds. Okay, and the next steps for this portfolio, Public Trust does do training events all over the country. We're hosting one online here in September for anyone who would like to participate. They are for continuing education credits as well as they're complimentary. So we'd like to, it's kind of our way of educating our clients as well as the public about what's going on in the public finance sector. And going forward, what we like to do is continue providing regular updates. Our firm puts out monthly, weekly, and quarterly packets of information. And every Monday we put out Monday Musings, which is done by our credit team, where they give a kind of a brief overview of what's going on in the credit markets. On a monthly basis, our portfolio management team puts out an economic outlook. And then on a yearly basis, we meet here with the city to discuss the portfolio. We are going to continue working collaboratively with the budget and finance staff to meet the liquidity needs of the city. And then, as we discussed a little bit prior to this is that every 6 months, we meet collaboratively and discuss whether there's extra assets in cash that could be earning more in the core portfolio or liquidity portfolio.
Mayor, members of the council, if I could also, just on this slide, point out, as I said earlier, this is the current benchmark that Public Trust is managing to. It's the Bank of America 1 to 5 year AAA, AA government credit index. That's the most comparable to the types of investments that we're allowed under state statute to make. And again, it captures that desire and strategy to take advantage of the longer-term investments and ladder them between 1 to 5 years.
Are there any other questions?
Mayor, thank you. I've asked this in previous years, I'll ask it again this year. How is our portfolio combined performing to peer cities?
Mayor, members of the council, we don't have that information with us today, but we can certainly send an email to the city council.
Thank you.
Is that it? Good?
There are no more questions. I'll turn it back over to Lizette, or
Mayor, members of the council, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you.
Mayor, I have one curious question for Mr. Mehta, which has nothing to do with investment. Would you happen to know a gentleman by the name of Jamshid Mehta?
as Councilmember Clark, I have met him.
So you're not related to him?
I am not related to him, but I do know him, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, item number 2 was removed from the agenda by our staff. Ms. Bauer, would you introduce item number 3, please?
Special event season update for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, and review of the chocolate experience event.
Mayor, members of the council, we're excited today to talk to you about our downtown special events update. And here to make the presentation will be led by our Director of Parks and Recreation Special Events, Mr. Jim Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good morning, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, we want to do a review of the special events from this past year and a look ahead on what is coming this next year. And we'd like to have, at the end of this, council feedback and consensus on potential changes that we present. I'd like to turn over the presentation to Heidi Barriga, who's our Special Events Administrator, and have her walk through the slides with you. Before I do that, one last thing. We did make a change, and you had a new PowerPoint delivered to you today. The actual text slides and the page numbers are the same as the previous one you had. We just added pictures to it, and then there were a few minor edits in the slide, particularly on slide number 9, which we'll cover when we get there today. Thank you.
Sorry. Good morning, Mayor and Council. It's good to see you all again. Today, like Mr. Burke said, we'll review the fiscal year 2020 events. We'll talk about the preview of the events for fiscal year 21, and we'll get your feedback and consensus on a few items as well. What I'd like to start off with this slide is a refresh on what was presented to you for fiscal year 20 for the downtown season. We kicked off the season with Glendale Glitter Spectacular Weekend. It was a little rainy, but we made it happen. We then went into the downtown in December, where we had lots of great things going on in the downtown area that we helped promote. The Glendale Glitter and Glow Party we had at the beginning of January. We had the new chocolate experience that was held at the Glendale Civic Center. And we had slated the Live at Murphy Park series for the month of April 2020, but due to the pandemic, we had to cancel that April series. Just a quick recap also on what was approved for budget for fiscal year 20. A total of just over $1 million was allocated for the downtown special events, and it's listed out here for you. It includes the Holiday Light Program as well as the citywide special events staff. What I'd like to note here is, although it says we have 4 full-time employees, those 4 full-time employees are not only designated for downtown events and festivals. They do other events throughout the community as well as the special event permitting process, which has been revamped this year, and we take more time in that, as well as the special use permits.
But before you go on, one of the things that, it's my understanding that the prices that you're showing up there, Glendale Glitters, 124,914, is not exactly a true number because we have other costs involved in that that's not being shown, transportation, police, sanitation. So unfortunately, I wish that we had that because I think it'd make a lot more sense to a lot of people. We hear frequently from people saying, well, it's not that expensive. But if we had the total impact of what it actually cost us, it's easier for people to understand why we do and what we don't do. So if there's a way that you could get that information out, I think that'd be helpful to all of us.
Mayor, members of the council, if I could just for a moment, we can try to capture that, but it's difficult because they're sort of indirect costs. However, I would like to say that in the past, we have sort of made an estimated or educated guess that it adds about another 20% on top of that cost. So when you're looking at $1 million in overall costs here, the cost including those items is somewhere close to 1.2 million.
So moving into the fiscal year 2020 event recap, we kicked off the series with Glendale Glitter Spectacular Weekend, which traditionally falls the Friday and Saturday after Thanksgiving. The estimated attendance this past season was 68,000 people. And just for reference, fiscal year 19, we had about 77,000 people estimated in attendance. Although the number this year was a little bit lower, really weather, we feel, played a big part on that, as we had severe storms just prior to the lighting that evening on Friday.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
with regard to this slide, if the actual expenses were 117,000 plus, and the formula is 20% more for those indirect costs, that brings it closer to almost 140,000 for the event. Wouldn't that also reduce the revenue generated by 20,000 as well? So the revenue would be more like 48,000?
Mayor, members of the council, that's not a net number on revenue. That's not
Okay.
the revenue less the expenses. That's just the revenue. So to get the net, you'd have to take the 68 and subtract the 117.
Okay. So, but to keep in mind that actual expenses of 117, we can just automatically add another 20% of whatever that figure is to the cost.
Mayor, members of the council, that's traditionally what we've estimated the additional cost to be, yes.
Mayor, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So there's been a few comments on justifying costs. So there's one that I think you said add 20% for some of those other costs that are not on here. And then I've heard Councilmember Clark about that the revenue may be lower. But let me ask this question. There's a marketing value to the city when we put on these events. Our name is out there, and we're out there quite a bit. So there's a value to that. And then there's sales tax that our downtown businesses gain and then have to pay. So, or revenue they make and then sales tax they make. Have you guys can you guys quantify those values to the city? Have you ever broke that down?
Mayor, members of the council, it's difficult to quantify a market value as far as name recognition and that type of thing. We have in the past looked at the revenue, sales tax revenue for the downtown merchants, but I don't have that information here. We didn't prepare that information today.
Mayor, thank you, Ms. Rios. And I wouldn't expect you to, but just for our citizens who are watching, when you look at this and you say 124,914 to put on that event, plus an additional 20%, and we're only making 68,000, you reduce that a little more. Sounds like, why are we even doing this? But there's a lot more value to putting on the events in downtown than just revenue. I don't know that the philosophy or policies of the city were to say, let's put on this event solely to make money. So I want to just be sure that our citizens that are watching and listening, the that I know of, the events weren't solely to gain revenue, and there's other benefits to the city when we put these on. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. A few featured elements that we had incorporated into this year's season that I believe we had talked about last year was snowfall at the amphitheater throughout the weekend. We were also able to offer a free Home Depot Kids Workshop. And as many of you, I think I saw pictures, saw the 16-foot large walk-through LED ornament that was in Murphy Park. We have a couple of recaps of some things that helped promote Glendale Glitters. We have the poster and one of the newspaper ads that was printed. This next picture is just another example of something that we did in the park. This was the 16-foot walk-through ornament. This was a great attraction to the downtown area. And like I had mentioned, we offered a free Home Depot Kids Workshop, and I'm not sure if any of you really know the impact of this, but the Home Depot stores, the first Saturday of every month, offer a free workshop to families and kids. And we were able to get Home Depot to donate these kits and the hammers and all the tools needed. And we set up a space for the Glendale Glitters, and kids could make these reindeer and sleighs. And the response we got back was really great from the families and the kids. A recap on the Downtown in December 2019 series. What we did here is we created a whole month long of advertising and things that took place in the downtown to encourage people to come, walk downtown, stroll through the lights, shop, and dine. We had the walk-through ornament that remained up the entire month of December. We did bring additional restrooms into the park, which was in the recommendation of the downtown merchants. We had community performance groups on the stage Fridays and Saturdays leading up to Christmas. And we had holiday banners that were installed on streetlight poles surrounding the Murphy Park area. A few more pictures to show you what our promotional materials did look like for the Downtown in December campaign. These right here were the digital billboards and a Glendale Star and Peoria Times ad. The next slide shows the banners that we did on these streetlights. We did produce 26 of them to put up in 26 different locations, again, surrounding Murphy Park, Glendale Avenue. And you'll see in one of these pictures, we actually, Councilmember Aldama had the downtown merchants participate in a photo op of hanging the banners.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Was this, the banners, were they part of the budget for downtown December?
Councilmember and Mayor, yes, they were.
Okay, thank you.
A fiscal year 20 recap of the Glitter and Glow Festival. The estimated attendance for this was 65,000. As a gauge for fiscal year 19, the attendance was 55,000. The reason it was much lower in fiscal year 19, though, is we did have to shut down the festival at 8 o'clock due to severe weather. The featured element that we had for the Glitter and Glow were the shaped balloons. And again, there's some promotional materials, a great job that we did getting the message out in these colorful, creative elements. Some pictures of the shaped balloons. I don't know how well you can see them up on the screen, but we did have the lovebird balloons, and you can see a side view of the pumpkin here. A reason for really getting these shaped balloons out here is the marketing and promotional side of it. And a lot of these shaped balloons have a following too, and people like to come and see them in different environments, in different festivals. Another photo of the pumpkin-shaped balloon with one of the bands that we had here on site that evening. What I'd like to do now is do a recap of the fiscal year 20, the Chocolate Experience. The first year of this new event, it was held at the Glendale Civic Center here in this building. The estimated attendance was 15,000 people for this first-time festival. This festival featured wine tasting and chocolate pairing. We continued to do the free shuttle tours to Soretta's Candy Factory. We did some downtown promotional opportunities with the merchants, and we had 37 chocolate-related vendors here inside of the Civic Center. I wanted to read to you a little bit of feedback that we received on this chocolate experience. From the chamber, the feedback was, overall, everyone seems that this was an elevated and sophisticated event and would like to see more of this happening. From economic development here within the city, the feedback they received was overwhelmingly positive. When they asked vendors how sales were, many of them said they did better than when they were in the park, and it was noted that the customers were a higher paying demographic. The other feedback we got were from individual downtown merchants, and that feedback was that they support the chocolate exhibitors being inside the Civic Center. It was an impressive group of chocolate, and having both gardens as a walkthrough for music and wine was a great idea. Some of them did say even though their store sales were down, they thought it was very well done and hope it continues in the future. The next slide shows you a couple of the marketing pieces that we did for the chocolate experience, one being the event poster, and the second one is the flyer that we had created for the downtown merchants that participated in the chocolate experience with us. And what we did is we reached out through the chamber to all of the businesses to see what they wanted to do to tie into the chocolate experience. And we printed up flyers that we passed out on site, as well as we printed large A-frames that we posted throughout the downtown area. Here's a photo of what some of the signs looked like. Again, it was held at the Glendale Civic Center. We offered live music out here on the Fountain Terrace. And one of the greatest things of the event, I think, was the wine tasting and chocolate pairing that we did out on the patio. This was a huge hit, and the wineries actually sold out of the wine glasses. Holding this experience indoors here at the Glendale Civic Center allowed more chocolatiers to participate in this event. And it wasn't just chocolate candies. We had chocolate crepes, dessert hummus, and things creative like push pop brownies. That's a recap of the fiscal year 20 downtown events. I'd like to review with you the tentative schedule for the fiscal year 21. In previous meetings, we had talked about possibly bringing the Live at Murphy Park back here in October 2020. And this is the change from the slide that you had earlier. This was not listed, but we did want to mention it. Because of where we are with the pandemic, we have decided not to move forward with an October date for the Live at Murphy Park. We will kick off the season with the Glendale Glitter Spectacular Weekend, that Friday, Saturday, right after Thanksgiving, which is historically in tradition for a lot of families in the area. We will continue with the Downtown in December campaign. And this year,
Interrupt you for a second. So Glendale Glitters is planned for November, but what happens 6 weeks from now if things aren't going the way they're supposed to? Then what? What's the plan?
Mayor and Council, that's a very good question. We had talked about a few options, and what we would like to do, and you'll see it in a few bullet points down here, is we'd like to take that money that was allocated for Glendale Glitters and create a lighting series in Murphy Park for the Live at Murphy Park series in 2021. And by bringing lighting into the park, it helps that connectivity from the amphitheater to the businesses up on Glendale Avenue.
Elaborate just a little bit.
Mayor and Council, so the lights are a huge part of the downtown area, as we know, just by having them up during the holiday season. And so what we'd like to do is bring those lights back for these nighttime series that we'll be doing live at Murphy Park. And the trees, yes, sorry, lighting the trees in Murphy Park so that there is another reason for people to come down and enjoy
So
the
would
downtown
would
area.
they be permanent, I guess is my question.
Mayor and Council, they would not be permanent.
So Mayor and members of council, so yes, we will look at where we're at with the pandemic, look what the governor's office is recommending in terms of allowing large people to gather safely, and then we'll make that decision if, what the special events team has said, that if we're not able to do the kickoff event after Thanksgiving, we will take those dollars that we would have expended on that promotion and then add it to which you'll get to in a second, the Live at Murphy Park over the months of March and April, and maybe allocate those money to a temporary lighting that will help overall ambience. And then that might give us a platform to look for down the road. Does it make sense to perhaps to have a permanent lighting in downtown? It gives us an opportunity to at least see what it looks visually and get response back from our, from the people attending the events.
Okay, good, thank you. And the reason I was asking is the parade committee, the Christmas parade committee, just met again and literally has made the decision that they're gonna go another month before they make that call of whether to go on or not go on. Safety is priority to everybody, but we certainly want people to have a good experience, so that's where the Christmas parade committee is right now. They don't know exactly what they're gonna do. Yesterday was 0 deaths. I mean, what a great report, and hopefully that continues going down, so.
Mayor?
All right, good.
Yeah, similar to that, and thank you for asking those questions. The city manager has often said that you need ample time to create these magnitude of events. So I'm not too sure that by November we'll be ready to have that many people in one area. So how much time do you need to let the citizens of Glendale know that we're canceling, we're not having it, or, because right now it sounds like, yes, we're doing it, this is the schedule.
Go, no, go. When is that
Yeah,
decision
go, no
gonna be
go,
made?
yeah.
Mayor and council, that's a very great question. Internally, we've had discussions on it, and we think we need to have that deadline as October 1. By October 1, we won't have expenses and a lot of out-of-pocket expenses on the festival, and it allows us to give the vendors that are booked and talent that we could book other opportunities.
Mayor, if I may, and Ms. Riga, thank you so much. And then again, this is all based on, I would assume, I guess it's a question, this is based on what, CDC guidelines that'll allow us to move forward in November? Is that what we're using to determine we can have the event?
Mayor, members of the council, it's really the governor's office is who we primarily are staying in line with, who's also then working with the state health department and, of course, the CDC.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I was doing some math as you were talking to figure out, let's see, Glendale Glitters came in, I guess, apparently under budget, about $7,389. And the Downtown December came in about $21,782 under budget. And then the Glitter and Glow, $22,987. So that's a little over $52,000. What happens to that money that was programmed for downtown events?
Mayor, members of the council, that money goes back into the general fund at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, the reason, Mayor, if I could, the reason I asked the question is because I would like to see that money programmed for other events downtown, or, work with the downtown manager. That money's already been allocated for downtown events. So, and so the money for, what's it called? Murphy Park Live at Murphy Park, whatever it was, that didn't get used either, right? So all of that just went back into the general fund?
Mayor's member of the council, that is correct.
Sorry?
That is correct.
Okay. That's normally what we do with things like that? Or we would-
Mayor, I'm sorry, Mayor, members of the council, yes, we don't carry the budget over into the next year, so it just goes back into fund balances, savings, funds that we didn't spend. Remember, these are the costs from last year. So they're the actual costs that were incurred last year, and last year's closed out now, so whatever we didn't spend, it just goes back into fund balance.
Right, I understand that, but we knew we came in under budget. At least we knew we were under budget for the Glitter, the Glow, and the Chocolate Affair before the end of the fiscal year. That, I would think we would know that, wouldn't we? We were under the amount that was budgeted. So there were additional funds there that could have been used for something else rather than going back to the general fund. So I'm just saying, and then the other thing I wanted to ask is, I guess this presentation is only for downtown special events. Are we looking at any programming for anything with Westgate? And we had also talked about Arrowhead Town Center. Is that a whole nother conversation, or does that mean this is the only special events conversation that we're having?
Mayor and members of the council, thank you for the question. This is just in regards to the downtown festival season. The special event department still will continue to do the other events throughout the city. Movies by Moonlight, Folk and Heritage, things like that.
Mayor, when will we know what other events you're going to be working on for this upcoming season? For example, something in conjunction with Westgate, something, and we had some money allocated for something, some sort of music, I think it was, in the amphitheater at Arrowhead Town Center. So when will we know, or can we get an email or some sort of report letting us know what other events you have an allocation for? Because of the way the budget was laid out this year, it was basically just a number. It was not specific, so.
Yeah, Mr. Phelps, you can answer.
Yeah, Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Tomachoff, if you recall last year, we had proposed, staff proposal was to provide some funding for both Arrowhead Mall and for Westgate. And then when we had the chocolate experience discussion, we did a pivot based on the council's recommendation. And so those, we did not enter into any kind of an agreement with them at that time. While we are focused today on the major, the larger programming elements of our special event season, certainly this could be an opportunity to receive feedback from the council. And if the council would like us to kind of track our expenses as we get into the special event season, and perhaps find a way to either, as you mentioned, either increasing the number of events that we're doing downtown, or to look for other opportunities to partner throughout the community, we'd be more than glad to get that consensus and direction and come back to you with some recommendations.
Mayor, yeah, so there's no money. I recall, I mean, I remember very well the chocolate affair conversation from last year, because it was completely eliminated. And we, at that workshop, just decided to, even though money had been programmed for events at Arrowhead Town Center, and I think it might have all been Arrowhead Town Center, but I don't remember specifically, but to reprogram that money to the chocolate affair. But there was no money in this last budget cycle for any programming anyplace else but downtown. That would.
Mayor, members of council, I'm sorry, Councilmember Tomacho, would you kind of reframe the question? I don't know if I.
So in this past budget, because of the way the budget book was laid out, it was impossible to know, was there any money allocated for any events other than downtown for this fiscal year?
Yeah,
in the budget?
yeah, we have a whole number of other, if you want to go through that, Heidi.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, I'm sorry, Councilmember Tomachoff, let me clarify that. We do have money in the budget for other events as well. We will continue to do the Folk and Heritage Festival, and there's money carved out for that. We are looking at continuing the Movies by Moonlight series in a different format for this upcoming season, and we are looking at doing some smaller community events as well.
Okay, I guess my point is, we had talked, I believe we had conversations with Arrowhead Town Center about doing an event there, and we reprogrammed the money because of the way that whole chocolate experience, was, I got a little sideways on all of us last year. And I'm happy that we did that, and it looks like it was a successful event, so I'm not sorry that we did that. But my point is, we had money programmed to do events at Arrowhead Town Center. And so there is no money programmed for that this year, is what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, when we put our budget together for 2020-21, we assumed the council wanted to continue with the focus on the chocolate experience. And so we didn't propose, because remember, the money was the same amount of money as the prior year. But again, there could very well be that we'll have additional savings as we enter into agreements and contracts on media. Sometimes we're able to buy a little bit more effectively. And like I say, I think this would be an excellent opportunity if the council would say that there'd be a priority perhaps on partnering with other events. You mentioned Arrowhead Mall, you mentioned Westgate. We could certainly do that and track that as we get into the special event season. And based on council direction, we could enter into some additional programming outside of downtown, or if the majority of the council wants us to focus and increase the amount of stuff happening within downtown. That's one of the reasons for today's workshop, is really to get direction from the council in terms of how you best want to spend your budget.
Mayor, one more, if I may. So I didn't realize we were exchanging one for the other when I understood we were exchanging one for the other last budget year because the budget had we were finished. I didn't realize that was going to be an ongoing proposition. I feel like it's important, especially for Arrowhead Town Center. I mean, that is huge revenue generator, and we all understand the complexities and the problems retail, especially large brick and mortar, has, and I feel like we shouldn't abandon the idea of trying to draw people to Arrowhead Town Center. So given where we are right now, and there's been no money programmed, I would really be in favor, since I looked through what we came in under budget last year was $52,000. We should be able to do something going forward, this money, keep track of the unspent money and allocate that towards some other area of the city for some music or special event.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tomachoff, what I would recommend, if the council has interest, we know we'll have potentially some savings on the, if we don't do the kickoff weekend for glitter. So again, we had talked internally about reallocating that money towards maybe lighting for the Live at Murphy Park, but if the council would prefer to see that money maybe freed up, and we could talk to Arrowhead Mall and other entities if you want to go that route. So my thought would be is we'll make a determination here very quickly about what happens in November, and we can certainly get back to the council with what that decision is and what we believe is some available resources that could be expended, and then really we'll just take direction from the council in terms of how you want to allocate it.
Mayor, I would be in very much favor in creating an annual event or events over towards the town center over there, as the council member has outlined. I think it makes sense. It's a different region of Glendale, and there's no events that are sponsored from Glendale over there, and I think we should do that. I think it's a great idea, and I could be very supportive of that.
And Mayor, if I could, thank you, Councilor Roldama. Just to clarify, I'm not talking about pilfering money away from an event, or if we end up not being able to do the Glendale Glitters event and taking all of that money, but I don't imagine all of that money would be needed just to light up Murphy Park for the music festival, that any unspent money at least for this cycle, and then next budget year, I'd rather have a little more robust conversation rather than assuming, have a conversation about what kind of special events would we like to see. I especially, like I said, I feel bad because the money had been allocated to Arrowhead Town Center, and then we did something else with that money, and I feel like we really should do something there, and they're going to need it. I mean, malls are struggling all over this country. So if we could generate more foot traffic there, it's in the best interest of the entire city to try to do that. So, and they've got a beautiful amphitheater there too. So I'm not talking about taking money from any downtown programming, but money that's unspent, I would like to see if we could use that someplace else to generate some other events.
Mayor, members of the council, I think we had, Councilmember Tomachoff, we had $10,000 budgeted for both Westgate and for Arrowhead Mall to work with their Merchants Association. If with just a little bit of feedback from the council, would be glad to try to look for savings as we come up, and then maybe we say the first 10,000 we will, we'll figure we can enter into this relationship, and the next 10,000, anything left over, we can then work on, as you say, repurposing for downtown lights, and maybe we can scale it back a little bit different to achieve the savings. So the staff was very supportive. As you know, last year it was the recommendation of the staff to try to, to kind of look at events kind of throughout the community. But as we learned, that the council had a real strong passion for maintaining the special events for the Chocolate Festival. So I think we can accomplish that. Again, we think, look, there's a chance that the Glow event, I think we're all hoping that life gets back a little bit normal, but it may not. And so if that, Mayor, if there's support on the council of doing that, I think it's an excellent idea. And what we can do is immediately start, and we'll report back out to you as we get into the special event season. It wouldn't take us long, I don't believe, to work with the Arrowhead Mall Merchants Association and to Westgate to come up with some creative, community-based events that would be free and open to our citizens. I don't think it'd take us a long time to figure something out with them.
Perfect, thank you.
Mr. Phelps, one question I have, just I'd like to be clear. Do you anticipate that we will have a good, strong idea at our first workshop of October?
Mayor, members of council, yes, I think that we'll for sure know about what's happening with the kickoff weekend, And I think there, we know there's probably enough resources freed up that we can start moving towards what Councilmember Tomachoff and Aldama have suggested.
But my question was, the decision, making that decision, can we anticipate that we would be able to do that at the first workshop of October?
Certainly.
Okay. All right.
Mayor?
You have a question?
Yes, please, thank you. Maybe a few. So regarding Glendale Glitters and opening weekend, at this point, we're planning that it would be, in essence, the same type of an event that we've had in previous years, last year and the year before. If we can't have large crowds and that sort of thing, describe what the event would look like then.
Mayor and members of the council, we've had a lot of internal discussions about that, and we're still researching a lot of options. A lot of other cities, not in Arizona, but in other states as well, have been coming out with some ideas. And one of the ideas could possibly be a virtual. We still have the lights that are being installed in the downtown area. We still have the people that enjoy watching them. Maybe it's a virtual event where we have you all either gathered in one place at separate locations and still can continue that tradition.
Okay, so that would be for the throwing of the switch and maybe the dancing and the other activities that occurred on the amphitheater itself. But I guess what I'm hearing is that we fully anticipate having downtown lit with lights for the entire season that we normally do, from Friday night after Thanksgiving through the second or so weekend of January. And whether or not we'll have the other crowd gathering type activities remains to be seen. But we will have Glendale Glitters, we'll have the lights, we will have the special attraction like the walk-through globe or whatever. And I would suggest if we're thinking that if we're going to be shifting, if we have to shift away from having the larger amphitheater type events and all of that, then maybe we could use some of that money to create or to purchase or lease more of the smaller type things, like how the globe is, but more of the selfie-taking opportunities that couples and families can do together, and they can be sprinkled around, the downtown and down into Catlin Court to help encourage people to cover the whole course with a map and that sort of thing. So they still have a reason to come down here, a reason to wander about and to see the different shops and restaurants and things like that, so that they're still, that's still there. And that if we're not doing if it turns out that we wouldn't be doing the major opening night event, then of course there's savings in lots of areas like shuttle buses and all of those kinds of things that maybe we could look at increasing the level of programming on the weekends throughout the season. We've calling them, it seems like we're calling them downtown in December, which is a new phrase to me. I missed it if you introduced it that way last year. But that there could still be, for instance, these selfie stations and maybe some kind of music, whether it's a church choir or a DJ or something like that, that would, provide some activity, some sense of, an occasion, and that would still have the interest for our community. So,
Mayor and members of the council, I think you read my mind. You must have read my script, which, if I could move on to the downtown in December, that's exactly what we're looking at doing.
okay.
We are planning on having an attraction here in the Murphy Park area, like the walk-through ornament, and we are right now planning on doing some really neat skylines, which are lights that go across the street that will help the connectivity from Murphy Park up into Catlin Court. And what we're working on right now is making these daytime visible activities. So not only will they light up at nighttime, but there's that daytime presence as well, which will help engage people in coming down to the downtown area during the day. So we are looking at doing a few of those things already. So I think these are some great ideas. Thank you.
Mayor? Vice
Go
Mayor?
ahead. Councilmember
I hate
Clark.
to sound like the Grinch who stole Christmas, but I'm very pessimistic about our ability to encourage large groups to gather probably until January of next year. I just see it coming, and I'm upset, but I think that's the way it's going to be. When y'all come back in October, that first workshop in October, I would like to see two alternatives. The one where we can do Glendale Glitters basically as we've done it because all the restrictions will be lifted and we can all gather joyously together. And another scenario that prohibits us from encouraging large gatherings. And what can we do that's innovative and creative to replace the fact that we may be prohibited from encouraging large groups to gather. So it is my hope that you would be creative enough to bring us two alternatives, two scenarios. And whether we'll even know whether we can move forward in October is up in the air. So thank you. I'm just concerned.
Mayor and members of the council, if I can move on for the tentative event schedule, brings us to the chocolate experience. Being the first one here at the Glendale Civic Center, we really thought it was a unique event and had lots of great feedback, and we'd like to continue that here at the Glendale Civic Center and improve on what our successes were last year. Lots of great feedback, and we see that being a real tradition here in the downtown area. We also would like to propose Live at Murphy Park, bringing it back in 2021, but proposing a 2-month series for March and April. We still are working out the logistics and the budget on making it a 2-month-long series, but we'd really like to bring that activity here to the downtown area for both of those months. On this next slide, what I would like to talk to you about are some changes that we would like to put in place for fiscal year 21. The biggest change is increasing the access to the businesses around the park. And by doing this, we open up flow in and out of the park and the surrounding streets. We allow fewer vendors in the park. We eliminate the beer garden fencing, which eliminates the alcohol sales. And by doing this, we're asking the patrons to go into the local businesses to make these purchases. And eliminating, at least for this year, the kids' rides in the downtown area. We would add hand washing stations and hand sanitizing stations to all of the restroom areas. And by obviously knowing eliminating alcohol sales is a huge impact on one of our partners, the Glendale Ambassadors. And after this, we would reach out to them and figure out other ways they can participate in the festivals and help making them whole. So I want to make sure that we recognize that. But we feel by eliminating that, it really helps the access in and out of the park and helps the congestion there at the pinch points.
Mayor, thank you. I understand that the ambassadors have suggested on their own part about downsizing the space that they have. Is that a consideration, or are we only looking at totally eliminating what they're doing?
Mayor's a member of the council. Even by downsizing their space, we still need to have all the pedestrian fencing in the downtown area because of ingress and egress and an alcohol perimeter. The cost related to that would not be significant, just downsizing the tent. Cost savings, I'm sorry.
Mayor, what about, I think that somehow or other that beer festival is an integral part of the experience. What about doing it in front of the Civic Center? You have that large expanse of grass. You're talking about downsizing it. Wouldn't that be an appropriate location? Then you don't have to fence off all the streets. You just have to fence off the grass area. Is that something that y'all have considered at all?
Mr. Phelps?
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, if you recall, I believe it was 2 years ago, may have been 3, it was 2 years ago, we had proposed relocating that a little bit farther down on I guess, Glen, a little bit more towards the east, and we had quite a bit of, of pushback by the, by the ambassadors who are running that. I think it's important to note that, that when they put a tremendous amount of work and effort and volunteer hours into it, but it's been, the sales have been declining and the costs are expensive. And, as a fundraiser for them, I believe the number was $218 is what they made last year after all, for a full weekend of activity. So we thought, from a staff, that we think it's an important civic activity to support because they do a lot of good things in our community, that we would find ways to engage them in our weekend, whether it be helping with being ambassadors to help do direction and other kinds of activities where they can utilize their volunteer hours, and then we could go in and we can help support them, by providing them reimbursement for the hours that they give us. So we're looking at that, but certainly we could go down by the Civic Center, but even just pushing them down really was, I think it was down about 50 feet more to the east. They felt it really impacted their sales. But again, I want to also emphasize that our goal here would be to try to drive as many of those adults wishing to have an adult beverage, ideally into our restaurants that are there. So that was part of the reason the staff came up with this recommendation.
Mayor, so I'm all for supporting our adult beverage dispensing businesses in downtown Glendale, both as a council member and just as a resident. I do my part to support them. But I also know that during this particular season, they're pretty much wall to wall anyway. They're packed in quite well, it seems like. And I may hear from them shortly to say, oh no, they could hold a couple more, but it seems like, this is their high season and we're doing well on that. It's my understanding that the ambassadors historically have been able to make as much as $35,000 or $40,000 during the Glendale Glitter season, and that with the changes that have been being made, it's been tapering off. But the ambassadors don't even recall whose idea it was 20-some years ago to put that together, but they've grown into a really useful and supportive part of our community. It's community that they're doing. And all of the money that they raise goes back into the community. They're all volunteers, and they do a wide range of things that benefit the community. They're always ready to help. I want us to be sensitive to their ability to continue making money because they do funnel all of that back into the community.
I have a question. I don't know who this is to, but some of our merchants in downtown, I understand, no longer have a liquor license. I understand that there's one or two that won't be in business within the next month or so. So I would be curious, how many establishments are we going to have in downtown Glendale that can sell alcohol? Or somebody can get that figure for us and let us know.
We'll have to gather that and get it back to you, Mayor.
All right, I'd appreciate that.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. The city manager, thank you for being thoughtful about our restaurants and those who sell alcohol at their restaurant in downtown, because that is important. But I too have not heard, in fact, I've heard the contrary, that during these events that restaurants do really well that serve alcohol. I have not heard anything different than that. The ambassadors do a very good job in returning those dollars to our community, as the council member suggested. So I don't think at this point, I think it's a great suggestion to help our restaurateurs who sell alcohol. But I can tell you that as often as I frequent downtown, I have not heard that during the events that they're hurting for liquor sales. I think there's enough there. There's a different ambiance of having a drink in the restaurant as having one in the festival. Some will have a couple there, and they'll walk over to the restaurant and do the same. So there's a lot of value in keeping the ambassadors in this event. So I would be supportive in keeping them. But thank you for suggesting the thoughtfulness in supporting our businesses. So thank you, Mayor.
Looking at me? Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it's my understanding that this is how they fund what they do in the community. I mean, they do have some other smaller events, I think, but this is the lion's share of their fundraising, is the money they make with this operation that they have with Glendale Glitters. I believe that's the case. I would like to find a way to accommodate them. I think they do a lot of good work in the community. I like Councilmember Clark's idea of possibly maybe the Civic Center. So the idea is not to close down any streets. Is that what you're proposing?
Mayor, as a member of the council, the streets would still be closed, but we would not have all of the pedestrian fencing, that bike rack, known as also, lining the streets, creating bottlenecks throughout the festival and really closing off the park.
So Mayor, if I could, so basically the footprint is going to remain the same as it was before, as far as where the barricades and all of that's all going to stay the same?
Mayor, as a member of the council, correct.
Okay. I think we could find a spot for them then. If we're going to go ahead and put the barricades out, I would think we're going to be able to find a spot for them to do the fundraising. They do a lot of good in the community, and it's my understanding that this is how they generate the money that they give back. So, especially since we're already closing down the streets, I mean, maybe where they normally are, right adjacent from the park, might not be the best spot. But I'd like to see us find a spot for them to set up their tent.
So Mayor, members of the council, yeah, so just one thing, operationally, because it's alcohol, you have to fence that in. And so that's kind of where the physical barrier kind of, from a movement of people. But again, Heidi, what was the amount 2 years ago we distributed to them?
For Glendale Glitters in fiscal year 19, they made $1,047.
So they've made $1,047 and $218 in the 2 years. And so staff, we were very sensitive to what an important part they are of our community. But essentially, they've averaged over the last 2 years about $600 to distribute back into the community. We felt like, maybe the win would be is we find a way to be able to provide them resources that they can continue to fund the programs in the community, but in a way that's more productive for all of their volunteers that are putting volunteer hours in. So that's why staff came up with the recommendation. We can clearly keep it where it's at. We can clearly move it. But I just want to reemphasize, because the costs are fairly expensive to do this. So I know Councilmember Turner mentioned the $35,000. Again, all I know is that in looking at the last 2 years of what was distributed back to them, it seemed to be disproportionate for all their hard work that they put into it. And so we were just trying to come up with a way that, quite frankly, would acknowledge their hard work and their contribution to this event in a way that was more financially productive. But again, one of the reasons we're here today is to receive feedback and input from the council, and we'll be more than glad to to make the necessary modifications based on the conversation today.
I'd like to offer a suggestion. If I'm not mistaken, liquor control has what they call an extension of premises. And so a licensed restaurant that sells alcohol can extend their location by putting up a barrier fence around their location on the condition that I believe they have to share 25% of their alcohol revenues with a 501c3. There might be a possibility we can get both. We can help our ambassadors, and we can also turn around and emphasize or push people to go into our local restaurants. I'd like somebody to follow up on that. I don't think that we have more than a handful of liquor establishments or restaurants that sell liquor in downtown Glendale any longer. I don't believe so. So it might be a way that we could help them out. They could extend their premises. We wouldn't take up a lot of extra room, and ambassadors could still make some revenue from it. It's just a suggestion.
Mayor, I did have a follow-up, if I could. Another possibility for the ambassadors is, I don't know how the wine worked but you did say that they ran out of wine at the chocolate affair. They might possibly be interested in participating there also. Especially if one vendor ran out of wine, we might need another one anyway. But that might be another opportunity for them to do some fundraising that's probably an easier setup and tear down for them also.
Thank you, Mayor. I was distracted. I missed that comment, so I hope to hear that again. So I just got a message that last year the ambassadors brought in about 6,000. That included the water sales, I guess, the chocolate, hot chocolate they do, the tips that people leave that then actually get put back into the fund. They're not tipped. The volunteers don't keep the tips. That all goes back into their contribution fund. So that's what I understand. So I'm not really in favor of putting an end to it right this season, particularly without their input and alignment. But what I am interested in looking at is that as part of our events, we've been talking about the Live at Murphy Park series. And I would like the ambassadors to have the first shot at being the beer and wine vendor for those weekends. That might be a way to adjust it to where they can be doing what they've been doing. The weather would be different and probably a little more conducive to having a glass of wine or a cold beverage. And then that would give them, that money-making opportunity. I don't want to say that for myself that, I don't want to determine or have the city determine, here's what you'll do, with your, you're here to volunteer and here's what we want you to do. Some of you go do this and some go do that. The ambassadors have been a self-created, self-driven, self-organized, self-managed organization. And they've done well with it, and I'd like to see them be able to continue it. If for whatever reason or reasons that the Glendale Glitter season isn't the time, then I certainly think we ought to give them the opportunity to do what they've been doing through our April Music series. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The numbers that I've heard are that the liquor sales for the Glendale Ambassadors have been very minimal, but yet we do have a greater number that's been reported from other activities. I kind of like the mayor's idea of doing something with the restaurants that would allow the Glendale Ambassadors to participate and receive 25% of the I believe is what you said, 25% of the proceeds, as well as allowing them to still continue to do some of their other events, such as, you mentioned hot chocolate sales and water sales and perhaps other ways that they were making money, but don't require the fencing perimeter. Because it seems to be that Parks is saying the fencing perimeter, and I agree. Every time I've been there, I didn't quite understand what the fencing perimeter was all about. Now I understand it better. To me, it's a major obstruction for the entire programming for downtown. I don't believe we should just eliminate the opportunities for the ambassadors to make some revenue, but I think there's some other alternatives here on the table that would provide both the elimination of the perimeter and still allow some money-making opportunities for the Glendale Ambassadors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor, members of the council. What I'd like to do then is go to the next slide, which shows the budget for the fiscal year 21 Downtown Glendale Special Events. And I believe, as the city manager had mentioned, nothing had changed from the previous year. Budgeted amounts would all remain the same. One thing I'd like to note here, though, the holiday light budget on this chart is $188,000. And I know there was just the approval of the contract for $230,000. That $188,000 that you see is what it costs to do the traditional holiday lights in Murphy Park and the surrounding streets of just wrapping the trees. The additional money that was approved will come out of the December in downtown budget and in the Glendale Glitter Spectacular budget. There are line items allocated in there. The overage from the 188,000 allows us to bring in things like the 16-foot walk-through ornament and these skylines that we're talking about to help the connectivity from the park to Catlin Court. And on the last slide here is next steps, and what we're asking for from you today is consensus on the changes that we just proposed and answer any questions that we haven't already.
Consensus to move forward?
Mayor, question before consensus. So are you going to come back to us the first workshop in October? And might that not drive whatever consensus is achieved regarding everything, really, between now and the beginning of next year? So are you coming back?
Mayor and council, yes, we can come back in October and report to you where the status is of the pandemic and the measures and what we can do with gathering, and then report on any alternatives we have at the time.
Because that might change whatever direction we give today. And I'd hate to set you all down a path that could change in October.
And actually, I think it's important that we give them a direction now with a caveat that we may have to change direction immediately.
Okay.
But at least, I think they need to at least have that direction.
So, Mayor,
So, do you have a question about
Yeah,
that?
the consensus, yeah. So Councilmember Clark mentioned something really interesting earlier. I alluded to it, but she said it. So, it's really, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if it's going to get better or get worse. The news is really good on COVID. However, here you wrote down eliminating kids' rides, COVID-19. If you have to eliminate kids' rides because of COVID-19, you're eliminating the whole event. So I'd like to leave the kids' rides in there. Should everything be good, we have kids' rides. If we take it out now, it's out. We're not putting it back. So if the council would support that, if COVID is eliminated, or to the extent that we can have people in crowds, why not have rides for kids? Let's just want to take it out of the budget and then can't put it back in.
Go ahead.
So Mayor, I maybe hearing that, then kind of a couple areas I think we're looking for direction. It sounds like, and maybe this, I can frame it, it sounds like, based on Councilmember Tomachoff and Councilmember Aldama, that we're going to try to identify through the course of the special event season, to try to identify monies that may be freed up based on a change in schedule or through other kind of cost-saving measures that we could work with. Sounds like there's two major hub areas. One would be the Westgate Entertainment District, the other being the Arrowhead Mall area. That was kind of the first, maybe just to make sure we got consensus on that. We can certainly look at the kids' rides. I don't know how long we have to enter into a contract. We can work through that. And then the third would be the, I guess, a direction in general regarding the beer garden and the ambassadors.
I have a question on the kids' rides. We do not pay the vendor for the kids' rides. They come out and set it up and they collect monies. Is that correct?
Mayor and council, that is correct.
So we're not out any money on the kids' rides?
We do, Mayor and council, we do receive a percentage of the kids' rides, and this past Glendale Glitters, it was $1,000.
$1,000. Okay. I'm not getting in the kid ride business.
Mayor.
Who else had a question?
Yeah, before we move on, I'd like to spend just a little bit more time on the chocolate experience. And you presented some testimonials of people who enjoyed the experience or thought it was an improvement, but I don't think that was a universal sentiment. I don't know if there's a way to tell whether more people actually liked it better or didn't like it better, but I do know that, there were, I received some negative feedback about it, though I will say for myself, I thought there were lots of positives associated with that, but I don't want people to think that the ones who had a different point of view are being ignored or not heard. Or they're at least being heard. They may be being ignored, but at least they've been heard. So I think we should acknowledge that. The estimated attendance was 15,000 and the number of vendors was 37, according to what you said earlier. how does that occur to the chocolate affair from some of the previous years?
Mayor and members of the council, just give me 1 second to get back to that slide, please. In fiscal year 19, attendance at the outdoor festival was 60,000 estimated. Now, keeping in mind that keep in mind that festival was reduced in fiscal year 19 to a 2-day festival. We had eliminated the Friday night portion of that. I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Number of vendors?
I don't have that number on me. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Do you have a ballpark?
I don't.
I don't recall whether over the last 20 years we typically had 75 or 80 vendors, or,
Yeah, we'll have to look it up and get back to you.
I'm sorry?
We'll look it up and get back to you.
Okay, well, be sure to share that with everybody. And then on the slide on page 8, the budget is 50,000. The actual expenses were just over 48,000. Revenues identified as $1,294. Where does that revenue come from?
Mayor and members of the council, that revenue of $1,294 was from soda and water sales that the Glendale Ambassadors did for us at the Chocolate Experience.
So that's the city's share of their sales. Is that correct?
Mayor and council members, that actually is almost all went to the Glendale Ambassadors. The way we net it, we give them the net after all of expenses, and our expenses were very minimal because of donated product that we had left over from previous festivals.
So the 37 vendors didn't pay anything to be vendors?
Mayor's a member of the council. This chocolate experience this past year, due to the short time frame that we had to get the chocolate experience up and going, there were a few things that we did not offer and that we did not get revenue on. One of them was sponsorship. With it being so late in the game, it was very difficult for us to go out and get sponsors, and being a first-year event. Another thing we did not do at this experience, we did not do paid parking. Where for Glitters and Glow and for Glitter and Glow and Glendale Glitters, we get a revenue on parking. Also for this event, because we were in such a small time frame and we really wanted to make this experience chocolate related and not the traditional vendors that we have access to for vending in the park, we did work with an outside company to really go and get these exclusive vendors for us, and they paid her directly so that we could get this experience up and going in such a positive way.
Okay. Well, as much as I enjoyed the event, it doesn't sound like a sustainable model under that design. So we need to change the design and, come up with a better business plan for it. And it does seem to me like it was though an enjoyable event, it was definitely a significant difference from the previous experience, both financially and also with attendance, probably with the number of vendors, and most likely with the revenue impact on the downtown and Callan Court merchants as well. So if we're going to have a conversation about it, I think we ought to have the information that we can look at all of that. So next time, let's do better. Thanks.
Mr. Aldama, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on the contrary, and this is just from the council member, I'm just the council member for downtown to some, but I will tell you that when decisions like the decision that we all made to reduce the footprint of the chocolate affair and move it over, the council member for that district, and happens to be mine, gets the blunt of the blame for losing such an event. I will tell you that it was a really tough pill to swallow, and I had to go out and talk to a lot of our merchants. However, while it was very difficult to watch it leave from the park over to the Civic Center, the contrary is that a lot of merchants called me and emailed me and said, that was a great event, just needs to be built upon, needs to be improved. This is good, not as bad as I thought. Now, if you were to have lost the event, that had been something else. But I'll tell you what, I called Kevin and said, hey, that wasn't too bad at all. I think we've got some improvement to do. But, Ms. Briga, you hit the nail on the head. You didn't have a lot of time. We were down to the wire. We were going to cancel it, we were going to move it back to the park, and we were moving it back to the Civic Center. I've got really good emails from downtown merchants that said, I'm glad you guys didn't eliminate it. Some were not, you know, they were curious if it was going to go off good or not. Overall, the return was, that went well, let's improve on it. And I think that's the message that we need to send to our staff, that, okay, it wasn't the best, last minute planning, I think we can do better. So just as a council member for downtown, I'm telling you that the merchants were okay with it. I think it can just get better from here. Let's
Mayor.
not lose the event, let's build on it.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you. I visited the event. I think that you guys did a fantastic job considering the time constraints that you were under. I think it is very unfair to compare a first-year event created within a very short time span with an event that had previously gone on for the past 10 or 15 years. It's like apples and oranges. There's no comparison. I think that there is an opportunity to build this event. I would hate to see it go away or be relegated back to the park again, simply for the product that's being made available. Chocolate melts in heat and sun, and keeping it in an air-conditioned venue is an important ingredient of such a type of food festival. I think that there's more space in the Civic Center that can be utilized to enhance the event, and I'm sure that you're creatively looking at those opportunities now. But I think it's tremendously unfair to compare a brand-new event, first time out of the box, in a short time frame, with something that's been going on in the park for many years. It's not a fair comparison. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
Just one thing quickly, Mayor, if I could. I agree. I think it was worth salvaging, as uncomfortable as it was for some of us. I think it was well worth salvaging. I think it's, we're a community. These are the events that tie people to their community and give them a sense of belonging in a community. And I hate to let go of some of this stuff. But I think it could be very successful. Last year, we need to market it early, and we need to make sure that the vendors who thought that it was canceled because they were told it was canceled are aware that we have pivoted into the Civic Center and that we had a successful first year and try to get the vendors to come back. So I do want to give you guys kudos for being able to put it together in such short amount of time. This year, I look forward to be quite successful this coming year. I think it's really something we can improve on, and I think people will enjoy it.
Okay, can I
Mayor, if I could just, one final, because I'm concerned that maybe my comments were misconstrued. I said that I went, that I had a good time, that I enjoyed it, and I heard good things about it, but I didn't hear universally good things. And, that should be part of, I think, the presentation. And the other thing that I'd like to say is that, as I recall, council's instruction to staff was to move the event. It wasn't to rename the event, reimagine the event, redesign the event, make a new event. It was to move the event. So therefore, I think it's fair to make the comparisons. And as to what was the turnout for it, what was the financial return on it, how many vendors, and all of that. So, and I'm not saying, I think I said, I think we should continue doing it. I had a positive experience from it, but I think we need to look at the full picture. And I don't want my comments misconstrued about being unfair to staff. I just want to make sure we're looking at the full picture and that when council gives direction, that direction's followed. Thank you.
Okay, can I get a consensus on what was presented?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you have that, thank you. City manager report.
Mayor, members of the council, I have 4 items to bring to your attention today. First, as part of our strategic planning, where we continue to engage with our employees, we're just setting out again to survey all 1,700 of our employees using the Phoenix Business Journal's 2020 Best Places to Work. This allows us to benchmark improvements that we've made or areas we have to work on. And so, again, going back into prior years, we've been able to make adjustments and add elements to how we engage with our employees based on this survey. And so, again, it'll be a great benchmark not only for other governments that participate in the survey, but really gives us an opportunity to benchmark our performance within the private sector. Oftentimes, we compete for many positions in the private sector, and so we'll make sure we get back and share the results once that is done. The second is we're excited to talk about a program that tomorrow that the city and the Glendale Chamber of Commerce will be launching called the Glendale Gold Star Program. And this has been essentially a partnership of the Glendale Chamber and the CVB, and it's to recognize our Glendale businesses that have kind of gone above and beyond in making sure they're doing everything to keep their establishment safe, so that the public can feel comfortable in going and patronizing them. Again, our citizens have also done a great job. And we've had very few problems during the pandemic of people not following the recommendations that have been set forth. So the Glendale Gold Star program will just help recognize those businesses. We'll be able to communicate that through a variety of channels to our citizens and hopefully give them even more comfort to get out and to patronize those businesses that are still in the pandemic we need to be cautious about. The third is if you're aware, the DoD established under the president a new division, the United States Space Force, and so they recently announced that they are looking for a permanent location for their Space Command headquarters. And the city of Glendale, in coordination with our friends at the Luke Air Force Base, have made our intentions known to the Department of Defense that we do have an interest perhaps in pursuing Glendale as being part of the headquarters for the Space Command headquarters. And so we recently were indicated that we now that they've kind of accepted our application, and that we can apply for it. And so by August 30th, we'll be submitting an application with Luke Air Force Base, and we'll see where that goes. We'll certainly keep the council informed as to what's going on. The final thing is that the city manager's office did receive an unsolicited offer for a remnant parcel of land. We'll be bringing this back most likely at our next executive session. It's a pretty straightforward analysis, so the staff won't need a long time to validate. But per our policy, I am recognizing that we have received an unsolicited letter of intent to purchase some real estate. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. City Attorney's report.
No report, thanks.
Thank you. Council items special interest. Council member has the opportunity to indicate topics they'd like to have discussed by this council at a future workshop. Mr. Aldama.
None at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Clerk.
None at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Hugh.
None, Mayor.
Excellent. Councilmember Tom Shaw.
Yes, Mayor, I do have one. I'd like to bring forward the workshop on the city-owned property. I know we were given the list, but we've never actually had public discussions and gone through a list. So, and I imagine it's not something we can accomplish in one day, but bring back, starting with the largest parcels, and working our way down on what parcels of land, what we have available, not stuff that's being used like libraries and things like that, not right-of-way, but start with the largest parcels where we can have a discussion on whether or not we have any interest in selling the property, if we have any future ideas of what to grow with that property. But at least, starting with the largest parcels would be a good starting place, and then we can work our way down the list on discussions on city-owned property. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Turner.
None of my own, but I would like to support Councilmember Tomachoff's. I think it's high time that we bring that back. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one item I'd like to place on the workshop agenda, a code review committee discussion. We, from the code committee, will be providing a recommendation on parking that has gone through our consultant, and we will be providing that information back to the consultant as a final, and I'd like to bring that forward as a item of special interest or as a council agenda item for a workshop to discuss what has been recommended by the council so that we can move forward as quickly as possible on some of the recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, and for myself, I don't have anything, but I believe, I'm almost positive I got a list of properties. Seemed like it was about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago.
We did get the list, but we never actually had a workshop where we had, I mean, with open meeting law, we can't have discussions about it unless it's brought forward in
Okay,
public.
I misunderstood. I thought you said that you haven't gotten a list.
We have the list, but we've
Okay.
never had the discussion.
Okay, I thought we did. I was pretty sure that we got that. So with that, can I get a motion to go into executive session? I have a motion from Councilmember Aldama, second from Councilmember Hugh. Go into executive session. Any discussion on the motion? I don't hear any. So all in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it. We're going down the hall, right? Okay, very good. With that, this council meeting is recessed.